Hey there, everybody. This is Chris Flor, your current Belton Independent School District School Board of Trustees member representing Area 4. It's that time again. It's re-election time. So the election is on May 1st, and so I figured I wanted to take an opportunity to introduce myself to those of you new to the area or those who don't know me, and share some of the opportunities, challenges, and priorities from my own head as I see it. As we go into the election cycle here. So to start out with me, we've got this great family here. So I'm actually not a native Texan. Don't hold that against me. Fall into the category of we got here as fast as we could. But I've got the great group that you can see on the screen there, and I'm blessed with a lovely wife and 3 kids. And actually, from a school perspective, it's really kind of interesting because I've got one at each of the major levels. So I've got one in elementary, one in middle, and one in high school. So it's been a really great opportunity to kind of really experience the full breadth of what's going on within the district through the opportunities and experiences of the kids. It's really brought me closer to really end to end what's going on. From a work perspective, I'm an executive in a global IT consulting company that does have a presence in Belton, the southern part of the district. We've got almost 300 people sitting there doing work across the breadth of what we deliver globally. And so we support government in every way that you can think about it, financial services, healthcare, and four other industries all around the globe, actually from our location here in Belton. And so I'm very proud to be a part of that team. And it's really sort of important from a community perspective and helps kind of tie us into the community. The work. And that really goes into the community involvement piece of it. I think in addition to, just the family and the work, really try to make an effort to get myself to really understand the community and be a part of the community. I did spend almost 6 years serving on the board for Workforce Solutions of Central Texas. I also just finished up a 2-year term limit at the Belton Area Chamber of Commerce Board. Business is located in Belton, so served on the board there. Through the kids, I've spent some time as the assistant den leader for my middle as he was coming through the Cub Scout ranks. I've also spent some time coaching pre-T-ball and soccer through some of the local leagues, involved pretty heavily from a Project Apple Tree standpoint. Back when there was construction, we were building sculptures out of canned food. And so a little bit of everything, right? Really try to get involved in what's going on in the community, to take a little educational spin on it. I've also served as a multiple time speaker for the local P20 Council, which is essentially a group of local educational institutions. So think about ISDs and colleges and universities that come together on a recurring basis, kind of talk through things that are going on. So I've had the opportunity to kind of speak and be a part of those sessions a couple times. I also sit on some advisory boards for some of the local higher education institutions, from Killeen to the Belton and Temple area. So really have got to really understand sort of what that educational ecosystem really looks like here in the community. And maybe the last thing to talk about from a community involvement standpoint is I'm pretty much involved anywhere where my wife is involved as well. I would say I'm easily her biggest cheerleader. And so if you run into Rayanne in the community, certainly in the behind the scenes, helping to make sure that whatever she's got her hands into is going to be successful, and for her. So whether that's beef, whether that's PTA events, whatever the case may be, really try to go out of my way to make sure I'm being supportive of her. So at a high level, that's kind of me, the family, the work situation, and the community involvement. So I want to dive into, again, some of the opportunities, some of the challenges, some of the priorities from my point of view. I'm going to say in no particular order necessarily. So let's dive into it here. So the first thing I really want to talk about is bringing the journey of a graduate to life. I don't know, unless you've been under a rock, you've probably heard about the journey of a graduate. Is an activity that we really are still just in the beginnings of. What means so much to me for the journey of a graduate effort is really what it stands for, right? And so BISD students are more than a test grade. And what the journey of a graduate does or did or so far has done is we've pulled people from the community together, all walks of life in the community, right? So we've got parents, we've got students, we've got teachers, we've got business people, we've got city government folks involved, and to really sit that down and say, hey, what do we want the product of BISD to look like? What do we want? How do we want? What kind of people do we want Belton ISD to produce? And that was kind of the question that kind of framed the journey of a graduate. And from that effort, we came up with the 6 priorities that you see or the 6 competencies you see on the screen: perseverance, adaptability, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and empathy. And essentially what that is, it's the stake in the ground. It's the goalpost out there that says, hey, look, we want to produce this, right? And so we can start to work backwards now that we've established what those competencies are. We can start to work backwards and say, great, how do we get there? And so what do we need to do? The state of Texas tells us what we need to teach, but it doesn't necessarily tell us how we need to teach it. And so we can start to incorporate sort of the Belton ISD flavor and these competencies into how we actually meet those state required knowledge, the TEKs that are out there. And so a couple next steps here, we've just begun, right? Even though we've passed the journey of a graduate and what these competencies are, we really have just begun, right? So we need to fully incorporate what that journey is, that journey of a graduate and those competencies into the district policy and into the district DNA. And then we need to make sure that the effort wasn't wasted. And so we need to develop a visibility mechanism and reporting method to make sure that we're keeping ourselves honest and making sure that these are things that the community asks us to do and wants as a product, and make sure that we're reporting on that and actually doing it. So I'm very excited about this. This is sort of a personal passion project for me, and started actually back in 2019 as an idea I kind of brought back from a conference to the board, and so it's been very fulfilling to kind of see the progress that we've made so far. All right, so that's the journey of a graduate. So let's talk about another item here. So we got to recover from the global pandemic, not just recover from the global pandemic, but we got to accelerate past it. And so when we look at the pandemic, right, I mean, the things I'm thinking about really are kind of threefold: the educational impact of the pandemic, the social and emotional impacts of the pandemic, and the financial impacts of the pandemic. And so maybe we'll start with the educational piece of it first. I'm going to tell you, I've actually seen through my own kids some really amazing pivots and adaptations to how sort of educationally we've been able to deliver over the last year. And again, that's through the eyes of my elementary schooler, my middle schooler, my high schooler, have seen some really great things. Now, with that being said, the administration has really been asked to adapt on the fly and has made some really incredible efforts to do that adaptation on the fly. But we haven't always hit the highest mark for each and every student that's in the district. And so we need to make sure that we learn the lessons, the good and the bad, from the experience over the last little over a year, and incorporate that. There are some great things. I want to emphasize, right, the lessons learned. Some of these things are great, so we want to latch onto those great things, and we want to make sure that's part of whatever the new normal is, right, as we go forward. But the things that we didn't quite get right, or still, we could do it even better. We need to make sure that we go ahead and do that and incorporate that in lessons going forward. On the social and emotional impact side of the house, man, there's been some real impacts to our students, to our staff, to our families, whether you've been at school learning or whether you've been at home learning. And so we really do need to continue to identify these impacts, address them, and continue to make that a priority. Because what we do know is that when you're struggling socially, when you're struggling emotionally, you've got a much harder time unlocking your full potential. And whether that full potential is in the classroom, whether that is on the field, whether it's on the stage, and other area of your life, we know that if you've got sort of issues and challenges in that social and emotional space, it's going to be much harder to excel. And so we really do need to emphasize, but continue to put emphasis on that social and emotional recovery from the pandemic over the last year. And then there's certainly the financial impact. There were certainly unplanned expenses as we go through, and I think we've done the CFO's office has done a great job of really understanding where some of those unexpected costs are and looking for ways to do some cost offset, right? Whether that is some of the stimulus funding that's come through, other reimbursement mechanisms. We need to just continue to be as diligent as we have been to look for those cost offset opportunities to minimize the impact to the overall bottom line for the school district. So I think that's what I want to hit from a global pandemic standpoint. And so let's take a little bit of a look out into the future, right? Planning strategically for future growth. What do we need to do here? Well, we're in the middle of a strategic planning cycle, and much like the journey of a graduate, we've engaged the community. And so there's a heavily engaged community group who's meeting multiple times a week at this point to really go through the strategic planning process that will ultimately come to the board and will get incorporated into the district long-term strategic plan. So that's clearly a priority from that standpoint. So I think what I want to do is actually spend a little bit more time on the growth piece of it. So Belton ISD is one of the 100 fastest growing school districts in Texas. And we actually carry a label, fast growth school district. So that's a real thing. And we will be for the foreseeable future. We've got a great partner company that we work with that works on demographic data. And we've got, we just did maybe 2 or 3 meetings ago, sort of our latest demographic update, and it takes us out through like 2030 from a demographic standpoint. And so we're really taking a look at what does that data tell us, right? How do we need to proactively take a look at what we have from a facility standpoint to address the continued high growth that we're going to have. And so, taking a look at the numbers, me personally, I think, we're going to need some new facilities. I think there's no avoiding it. And so if you take a look at the numbers, I think 2025-ish and 2028-ish, right, give or take a little bit, I think we're probably going to need at least 2 new elementary schools in those timeframes to deal with the influx of students. I think in the mid to long-term time frame, 2028-ish, 2029-ish, I think we'll maybe looking at a new middle school. And then at the much longer term, like 2031 beyond, we're not that far from another high school. I know it's hard to believe. We're just opening high school number 2. In the 3rd high school, we've got enough demographic data and projection out in the future where we actually do need to think about that over the longer term. And so we've got to stay ahead of the curve from a growth planning standpoint and make some decisions and choices now so that we have the capacity in a forward-looking, fiscally responsible manner to really do that planning. If we don't spread it out and do it all the way along, we're going to end up needing the facilities and they're not going to be there. And so we've got to do that now, even though the needs, I think, are that far out. Although it's not just about new facilities. I think, while we're looking at the new facilities, I think one of the challenges is we can't forget about the facilities that we have today. And looking back, I think there's some real needs in some of the older elementary schools, some of the original elementary schools that are out there. And so we're going to need to take a hard look at what do we need to do there to make sure that we're taking care of those students and giving them the same kind of opportunities, from a facility standpoint that folks coming into the newer areas have. We do also need to take a look at some of the extracurricular facilities and what do we need to do there. And so what do I mean by extracurricular facilities? I'm thinking about things like, athletic facilities. We've got a 2nd high school here now, and I mentioned a 3rd one. And so over the long term, we need to make a decision. Do we want to have a centralized, district level athletic complex where everybody comes for their home, as their home field, or do we want to have decentralized, like campus-based athletic facilities at each campus? And so there's certainly cost benefits, cost options on either side, and we need to think about that. We also need to take a look at things like the swim center. And what does the renovation or replacement of the swim center look like? We need to look at things like our ag facility and the ag needs that we have. And so all of these things we need to take a look at. And again, we got to be really careful about how we do it because, we got to do it forward looking. We got to do it in a fiscally responsible manner. We got to do it in a way that's planned out so we can minimize the impacts of the taxpayers. And so there's a lot to this planning strategy, future growth planning as we go forward. So, all right, so let's talk about the next one here. Retaining, mentoring, developing, and recruiting the best, most talented staff and administrators. We are a fast growth school district. I mentioned that before. And what that means is not only are we growing in students, but we're going to need a lot of teachers and administrators and staff as well to go with it. And so the competition for talent is going to be absolutely fierce. It's going to be really important that we are proactive, aggressive, and creative in the way that we go out and we recruit folks into the district, right? We want the best and the brightest to be with our kids. And so we're going to have to make sure we're really creative in how we do this from a recruiting standpoint. So now let's take a look. Maybe we'll work this backwards, right? So we'll take a look at developing next. We want to make, it's not just about recruiting, right? You got to make sure that the people that are here, you're doing the mentoring and developing for those folks, and developing your next set of administrators and beyond. And I'm really proud of actually the decision we made over the last year or so from a board perspective to hire on two executive directors of leadership. So one who actually is responsible for the elementary school principal development, and one who's responsible for the middle and high school principal development. That's a huge investment in really the support of our campus administrators. I got to say, like the principal job and the administrators on a campus, I think have the hardest jobs of anybody in the district. Our principals have to deal with literally every single constituent that the school district has to deal with. They're almost like, the principal at a campus is almost like the mayor of their attendance boundary. And so, the investment that's been made in those two staff members is really to make sure that we're providing the support, providing the mentoring, providing the development, to make sure that our team is world class. Getting the job done for our kids, supporting educationally like they need to support, supporting our families like we expect to be supported. Our principals do a great job, and the investment in those positions is to help us get from great to amazing and beyond. And so, just an example of some of the things, that we have going on from a mentoring and development standpoint. And then retaining, right? So we got to bring a lot of people in, we got to develop a lot of people, but we got to make sure we retain the folks that we have. And I think sort of rebuilding the culture is going to be really important, making sure that, sort of the mission and vision and values from a central office standpoint make it down or consistently, to the different campuses. But we have to do it while respecting our roots, respecting where we came from, understanding how we got to be the destination district that we are, and make sure that we don't mess that up is really important. And so I think one of the great things actually about maybe not being locally, not growing up locally for me, is I've had the really genuine opportunity to ask the question, well, why is it that we do that? And how did we do that? And what does this mean from a culture and history standpoint? It's been great to hear those stories and really kind of, it's been great to relive that actually for everybody who's been involved in those conversations. Then also on the retainment front, I think we need to make sure that we've got an environment, a growth-focused environment. And in this area where, maybe me personally, I would maybe like to bring in some things from the corporate world into performance measurement and performance assessment, and with the spirit of, improvement, feedback, and constructive growth, and pushing people, to really excel and succeed, not beating any heads together, but just really sort of opening things up a little bit more from a corporate view, from an HR and development standpoint, to make sure that we really are getting the right feedback to the right people, to push them to be the best that they possibly can be. All right, so let's talk about tracking and influencing state education legislation. Oh, this could be probably an hour or two or three by itself. So I'll try not to get too far into the weeds here, but I do want to talk a little bit about property taxes real quick and how that works. And so I don't know how many people actually understand this, but the TEA actually sets the base tax rate for the district. So we are actually told what that base tax rate is. And it sort of sets the bucket, if you want to call it that, for how much money we get. And so if you want to think about it, it is a fixed size bucket. Say it's a 5-gallon bucket. And as our property taxes increase and our tax collections grow, that fills up the bucket. And as those property taxes increase and tax collections grow, that means the state actually puts less money into that bucket. And it's a fixed size bucket. And so it actually is a little bit more complicated than that. The size of our bucket gets increased a little bit because we are a fast growth school district. So we get an additional sort of add to the funding for that. There's some other things here and there, but it really does hold true even with those additional adds. The property tax is really complicated and to some extent a little convoluted right now for how we fund our schools. And so keeping an eye and really working towards paying attention on what's going on from a property tax reform standpoint is really important. We also want to make sure we preserve the gains from House Bill 3. So the House Bill 3 was from the last legislative session. A lot of great things came out of House Bill 3. I know there's some haters out there from an educational legislation standpoint, but there really was some great stuff that came in from House Bill 3. And so I think make sure that we keep our eyes on preserving those gains that came to us in House Bill 3 is really important. Next item on here is maintaining or retaining 100% control of our fund balance. So the fund balance, for those of you who aren't familiar with school finance, that's basically our bank account, right? What we've got left in the bank, and kind of our rainy day fund, if you want to call it that. And so as a fast growth school district, retaining 100% control of our fund balance is incredibly important. We've got to maintain as much flexibility as we possibly can as we're dealing with new campuses that have to come online or additional teachers that need to come in. There's some legislation right now that potentially wants to limit the control that we have locally on that. And that really would be devastating for us from a fast growth school district standpoint. So we want to make sure that we can retain control there. Clearly, we want to make sure that we can maintain the funding that we have for technology and curriculum resources. We definitely need to make sure that we reduce unfunded mandates. So those are things that an unfunded mandate is something that like the state tells us we have to do, but then they don't give us any money to do it. And so that basically takes resources away from other programs that we would prefer to be doing to advance what we need from our students and our staff. And then certainly we want to take a look at state testing and assessment and accountability systems, and where possible, I would fall on the side of away from standardized tests to the point that we don't jeopardize federal funding. But the list of legislation that's kind of going through this session is incredibly long right now from an education standpoint. We've got some great support and education champions that help us and support us from a state government standpoint. State Representative Hugh Shine in Texas District 55 is a huge champion for education and for Belton ISD. And then we've got some additional great support from State Representative Brad Buckley and then State Senator Don Buckingham. So some good all-around support from that group. So we're very fortunate to have those folks in our corner. All right, and so I think we're coming towards the end here. So let's talk a little bit about student achievement. And so I am a member of the Belton ISD Board Policy Committee. And so one of the things that I've started studying recently is really the impact of student achievement policies on various different, various different areas of our student achievement. And so, what I'm looking at is, how do policies impact student course choices? How do policies impact GPA rating and class rank? And how does policy impact our career, college, and military readiness, or CCMR? These are pretty complicated topics, and they really do need to be carefully researched because you can't just make a change to any of these things willy-nilly. It's got to be it's got to be planned, it's got to be rolled out in a way that you don't impact students. And so there aren't a lot of answers to these things at the moment, but there is a lot of thought and research going into, what are we doing from a policy standpoint, or what does our policy do to impact changes that are, or choices that our students are making. There's some interesting ones like AP courses versus dual enrollment courses versus on-ramps courses. Right now, those three are not weighted the same, and yet they all potentially all yield college credit. And so there are students who are making course choices, to take one of these types of courses over the other because of the impact that it has to their GPA and their class ranking. And so I don't know, it's interesting, definitely interesting and thought provoking. And we are taking a careful look at sort of are we doing this right? Are we doing the right things for our students with those policies? We also want to make sure that we take a look at the student achievement policies in the relation to career and technical education, or CTE, and try to figure out if we're doing anything from a policy standpoint that is discouraging students from going down the CTE track in any way, shape, or form. That's a very important offering that we have. I'm very proud of actually the offerings that Belton ISD has in the career and technical education area. So we want to make sure that we make sure we're maximizing student participation in those things. And then we're looking at things like class rank. And should we be a ranking school district, or should we be a non-ranking school district? I think state law says, we have to report who's in the top 10%. But it doesn't say we have to do it from 1 to N, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't say we have to do that. We just have to identify who's in the top 10. So one of the conversations we're having in the policy committee right now is, should we be a ranking system or should we be a non-ranking system? And, so one of the big questions there is, well, what happens when you go to college admission? And so what we're starting to find out through this research is if you go apply for a school and you're from a ranking school district, they basically look at your GPA and your class rank, and that's that's one mechanism that they have to admit you. But if you come from a non-ranking school district, there's a more holistic approach and a more holistic admissions review that happens, where they look at your GPA, but they look at everything else, right? What are the extracurricular activities that you do? Everything else about that student. And so the question is one of those better than the other? Currently we're a ranking system. Do we need to explore being a non-ranking system? I don't know the answer to the question right now, but we are certainly in the middle of doing some research around it. And so I think taking a look and leveraging the policy committee and sort of where I sit there, and figuring out how do we support student achievement through the best policy, we want to make sure that we don't close any doors for any of our students through policy, right? We want to leave as many doors open as long as we possibly can, and give students a flexible opportunity to experience Belton ISD. All right, so that's like down the wormhole of my brain and some of the things that I'm thinking about from an opportunities and challenges and priority standpoint. And so I just want to remind everybody that the full-on election day is Saturday, May 1st, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at Pirtle Elementary School. If you don't know where that is, it's on South Pea Ridge Road. And so please Google that. We've got the address here. I'm going to tell you, every vote counts. Traditionally, school board election, especially a school board election that's competing with a city election, right? The city of Temple also has an election going on at the same time with different voting locations. A lot of times in this kind of scenario, the school board election takes a second seat. I will tell you, it's extremely important for our students. It's extremely important for our staff. It's extremely important for our families that you get out there and vote for the school board election. Clearly, you want to vote in the city election as well, but get out for the school board election. I've put in a lot of hard work. I think I've demonstrated over the last 3 years that I'm going to put in the time. I do put in the time. I do typically take the step back and think approach, and really try to understand what's going on and think about this a couple steps down the road and ask some of the tough questions, while focusing on our kids, while at the same time valuing our staff, valuing our families, and valuing our taxpayers and what they mean to the whole educational ecosystem. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your trust over the last 3 years, and for continuing to and for hopefully considering me to continue in the position for another term. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all, and please get out and vote. Thanks.